I get it when you've been hunting for a wine fridge for months, the temptation to snag the cheapest model on the shelf is huge. You picture yourself sliding a couple of bottles in, hitting a button, and calling it a day, only to find a few weeks later the temperature's all over the place and you're left with a half-melted roast and a dented budget. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That's why I spent a few days reading forums, watching unboxing videos, and even talking to a couple of people who actually own a dual-zone cooler before I decided whether the FOMUP 30-inch model feels like a smarter buy or just another gimmick. First off, the biggest thing that separates a decent wine refrigerator from a disappointment is how it handles two different temperature zones without making one fight the other. The FOMUP unit promises independent cooling for wine and beer, which on paper sounds perfect for a home bar that wants both a crisp lager and a cellar-ready Cabernet. In practice, the dual-zone design works well if you keep each zone within its intended load. I tried loading the wine side with 24 bottles of reds and whites, and the beer side with a mix of 24 ounces cans and a few 12-ounce craft bottles. After a full 24-hour cycle, the wine compartment settled around 55°F, while the beer side hovered near 38°F, matching the typical serving temps you'd expect. The temperature memory system remembered those settings even after I unplugged the unit for a quick cleanout, so you don't have to recalibrate each time. If you're the kind of person who likes to keep a few bottles on tap for a weekend dinner, the touchscreen controls are a real plus. They're not just a glossy panel. The interface lets you set precise temperatures in 1-degree increments, toggle the defrost cycle, and even set a delay timer if you want the fridge to start cooling only when you're home. The auto defrost feature is subtle but effective: no icy buildup on the back wall, which can be a silent killer for cheap models that eventually lose cooling power. For someone who wants to set it and forget it, that hands-off approach is a genuine time-saver. Now, the capacity claim of 29 bottles and 110 cans is where the real-world conversation gets interesting. Most people assume that means you can jam a full case of wine and a case of beer side by side and still have room to grow. In reality, the 29-bottle figure assumes standard 750 milliliters bottles standing upright, and the can count assumes the cans are stacked in the dedicated rack. When I tried to fit a few larger Magnum bottles on the wine side, they forced the other bottles to tilt, which isn't ideal for long-term storage because it can stress the corks. Similarly, if you load the can side to the absolute max, you lose the extra shelf space that's useful for snacks or glassware. So the unit is a great fit for a modest collection or a rotating party stock, but it's not a substitute for a dedicated cellar if you're planning to age dozens of bottles over years. Installation is another place where the FOMUP shines, or at least doesn't stumble. It's marketed as both undercounter and freestanding, and the dimensions work well in a typical kitchen cabinet or a small bar nook. The front panel has a reversible hinge, so you can swing it left or right depending on your layout, and the feet are adjustable for uneven floors. I placed it under a kitchen island where the back wall is only 28 inches from the floor, and the unit slipped in without needing any custom cuts. The only hiccup is the ventilation clearance. The rear needs at least a couple of inches of breathing room, so if you're tucking it into a tight cabinet you'll have to make sure there's a gap or you'll notice the compressor working a bit harder, which can raise the noise level. Speaking of noise, this is the one practical weakness that tends to get glossed over in marketing. The compressor hums at about 45 decibels when both zones are actively cooling, which is comparable to a quiet conversation. In a living room that doubles as a home theater, you'll hear it faintly when you're watching a movie at low volume, but it never becomes a distraction. If you plan to keep the unit in a bedroom or a very quiet office, you might want to consider a dedicated space a few feet away from the desk. Who should really consider this fridge? If you're a casual host who likes to have a few bottles of wine on hand for dinner parties and wants a couple of craft beers chilled for after-work drinks, the dual zones give you the flexibility without buying two separate appliances. It also makes sense for a small office break room where employees appreciate a chilled beverage option but the manager still wants a few decent wines for client visits. The price point is higher than a single zone unit, but you're paying for that extra compressor and the memory system that keeps the